Welcome to another video of our FP TraceManager product. My name is Thomas Steinmauer. I'm the product manager of the Log Manager series and FP TraceManager at Upscene Productions. In this video I want to discuss best practices and give you some tips and tricks on how to use the FP TraceManager product and the Firebird Trace API in general in high-loaded environments. So typically when you start working with FP TraceManager, you first have to register a server, a Firebird server. In this demonstration I'm using Firebird 3. So let's enter some credentials and we have to choose the Firebird 3 client library. So this is this one here. Then we're gonna connect, and the next step is to create the trace project. So usually when you start working with that, you probably don't care about all those settings. So you usually enter the necessarily mandatory fields like the project name and session names and move forward here, and you see some additional configuration options here. These are all related to what data the trace session should return. So you probably are new in that area as well when you start working with that. So I guess you want to see everything on the beginning. So let's start the trace session, and I've prepared a small demo application here which just produces some load. So for instance, inserting 100 records is a rather very small load. We will see that that's already finished here. So we have some statistics and we see the execute statement finish event name has been executed 100 times. So you can use the grid here to filter. For instance, the statement finished is usually something you want to have, because usually you monitor and trace the SQL execution time and something like that. So that's basically how you would start using the product and the trace API. So now what happens if the load increases? So for instance, let's insert 1000 records here. It's rather snappy from a Firebird point of view, so they are inserted very quickly, and we will see that the trace data grid here is busy with displaying data, fetching data. We clear out the regular expression filter here. We see that FP TraceManager is busy, Firebird is busy. The Firebird server here is basically finished now. Is finished with the trace data generation and sending to the trace client. So let's go back to the statistics tab, and we will see although we have inserted 10,000 records, we only see the execute statement finish event name has been occurred around 5,300 times. So if we again filter here for the statement finish part here and do a count, so that's a lot less than the executed statements. So what happened here? So basically there is an additional trace event here which tells us that the trace session has been suspended. So if we search here for session suspended, let me see here. Yeah, this one. So if we have try it again. If we have a look on the raw output, we will see that the session 1 is suspended because its log is full. So the Firebird server generated trace data on the server side too fast for our trace client. So when it starts to suspend the trace session and to remove data until the trace client can cope with the load. So if we are doing that, again, first open the Windows Explorer. At least on the Windows there is a program data Firebird directory, and let's do that again. We will see that Firebird starts to using files with a size of 1 megabyte. So if we open that one here, that's pretty much the raw output here from the trace data. So it stores that locally on the server side, and the trace client needs to fetch that. And if the trace client isn't able to fetch that in a proper time, the Firebird server suspends the trace session. So if you go back here again to the product, and we'll see that the trace session suspended event name has been occurred now 2 times. So there was another suspension here, and we didn't get the full picture. So why is that? So there are 2 reasons for that. The reason 1 is that you should be very selective on the trace configuration options which you really want to see. So for instance, in the first step, you pretty much don't care about that option and want to see everything. So this produces quite some load on the Firebird server, and the trace client cannot cope with that load. So this is the first reason, and the second reason is that the Firebird server has a default limit of 10 megabytes per user trace session, which the server uses in a temporary way. So what we can do now is to increase that, and we now have to disconnect because we have to restart the Firebird 3 server. So okay, let's restart, reconnect, start the trace session, and run the same scenario again. If we go back, it was rather snappy again, so but the Firebird server is now again busy, and we will see that we already have more than 10 1 megabyte files here, and FB TraceManager is busy fetching data, parsing data, and so on. So if we go back to the task manager, we will see that the CPU usage from both processes, the Firebird and the FB TraceManager, both are somehow busy. So let's have a look on where we are currently. So we are around 9,000 total executions right now, and now we have 10,000. And FB TraceManager uses some sort of queue here, so it puts stuff in the queue, and periodically a periodic worker is processing that queue. So you have some kind of delay here from the data generated on the Firebird server. But the timestamp, what you see here, the timestamp is the real execution timestamp. So that's the right context. All right, let's keep that running a bit. So it's already finished now with the commit transaction, and everything is fine. So this time we didn't get a trace session suspended event here. So we have been able to get all data in a proper way. Well, one could say that's a very simplified case, and inserting or executing 10,000 statements is, well, not that bad, but it's not comparable with a high production load scenario. So what I want to do now is to switch to a completely different environment. That's basically a stress testing, a load testing environment created by Pavel Sotov. Pavel is working in the Firebird QA He has written that stress and load testing environment completely from scratch for Firebird, and has been identified a lot of bugs there, a lot of bugs in when Firebird is under load, is under stress testing. So I'm gonna use that now to generate additional load. So what we have to do here is now I have to create another trace project here, because we are working on a different database, and the first thing here is I don't want to select all, because this would be basically too much. So my first recommendation is to be very selective with the trace configuration options you are using. So that's the reason why we provide some templates here. So I'm gonna choose the hotspots analysis template here. I'm gonna discuss that a bit later on, why we are choosing that. So I want to have a database filter, and now let's we don't need that, this one here. Now let's start that trace session, and now I'm gonna execute the stress testing environment with basically a simple command. So it simulates some kind of OLTP, so from a transactional processing environment, some typical load from a point of sale system, and the one here on at the end simply tells us that we want to simulate a load with only one user, one client. So if we open that, we will see that an additional ISQL session is running now, and we also see that CPU usage increases. So the Firebird service is busy, FP TraceManager is busy. You also see that the memory usage of FP TraceManager is increasing. The reason for that is that we are inserting quite some data into the grid. We are quite some inserting data into the memo component here. We will see that statistics is increasing here, so we have already executed quite some procedures, quite some stored functions which are new in Firebird 3. If we go back to the Windows Explorer, we already see quite some stuff here. So there are quite some files generated with the 1 megabyte size. So let's see how far we can go with that. We don't see a trace session suspended right now, so that's good. But what we see an increasing memory usage of FP TraceManager, and it's basically busy with receiving data. The thing is, when the grid is busy, you can't filter on that, so that's you have to pause that, and for instance then type something and so on, and remove that flag. So the test is running for about 1 minute. So the nice thing about that is that's the reason why I've chosen the hotspot analysis template for the trace configuration option, is that the hotspot is an in-memory aggregated view on the executed statements. So you probably don't want to have that detailed view on trace data. You probably don't want to filter on that huge amount of data. So I'm gonna stop the trace session here now. So the hotspot analysis view might give you the right answers, the right high level answer here anyway. So with the number of executions, the number of executions, and so on. So let's stop that. We don't want to store that in the FB TraceManager database. So that's for that one load with only one user client. So that's there's already quite some traffic involved here. FB TraceManager is using memory here. So beside being very selective with your trace configuration options, the other part is that for such high loaded system I recommend to entirely disable the visualization part here. So there's no grid involved, there is the memo component is not involved, so we don't see the row data. This is the first optimization here. The second one is that we probably don't want to store everything in our FB TraceManager database, and we don't want to have event processing, which doesn't make sense for the visualization part. I think it doesn't do anything if you keep that selected in case the visualization is disabled, but that's just for case. So if we're gonna restart now the trace session here, and we increase the load, or we rerun the load with that, we first have to clear out that value here and then rerun. So again, only one user hitting the database, and we are now seeing that the visualization part, the grid part, is completely disabled, also the raw part. So what we still get is the statistics here and the hotspots view. So that's basically the thing which is important. So we still see the CPU usage is now less from a FB TraceManager server side, from an FB TraceManager point of view, because the past trace data is not added to the grid. We still see Firebird CPU usage, and we see the memory consumption hasn't been increased now. So FB TraceManager, if I restart the FB TraceManager product, the executable completely and start from scratch, we will see that we are in the range of below 100 megabyte memory consumption. So let's see if we can wait for that. So if we click and refresh the hotspot view here, we'll see that that particular select statement has been executed around 300 times with a total execution time of 0, so it's rather snappy. We also have the average execution time might be interesting here. So there is one hard hitter, as it looks like. So there's a select count star from a stored procedure, so that's probably something we could investigate, for instance, in a production environment. If you see something like that, we also should see the execution plan. That's the wrong one. Let's see if we have the execution plan here somewhere. Right, so we see that, well, natural order. So what happens now here is the load is finished now, and we're gonna retry the same. We can keep the trace session running because the grid doesn't do anything. So let's try that with 5. We have again to remove manually that stop marker here. That's from the stress testing environment. And we'll now see that we have 5 ISQL sessions, and there is some load involved here. So Firebird is now has some sort of increased load. And FP TraceManager is rather okay. So if we go back to the files here, we will see that more and more is temporarily stored on disk. So if we open that one here, that's simply the raw output awaiting to be fetched from the trace client. So now let's see if we can. We are still haven't had any suspended trace session event occurring here, so we are rather fine with what we get here. So if we sort by the execute count in a descending order, we will see that new stuff is coming in, new selects and so on. So that's generating some load. The memory usage is still constant, so we don't have any suspended trace sessions yet. So I simply want to finish up that video now with basically a few recommendation best practices to summarize that. The first one here is that for high loaded system, the default configuration value here might be too low, so you can think of increasing that, but keep in mind that the setting is per user trace session. So if you're starting several user trace sessions, you may start filling up your disk just in case. So that's the first one. That's from a Firebird server side. The second one is that you should be or must be very selective on what data you want to generate from a trace API point of view. So that's directly relates to what the Firebird server writes on disk locally and so on. So be very selective here. The FP TraceManager product helps you here by providing some templates. So for a start and to get some overview of your system, you might choose the hotspots analysis view. That one picks out the mandatory trace configuration options to properly fill that data what we see in the hotspots view here. So that's the second best practice, be selective. And the third one, which is totally related to the FP TraceManager product only, disable the visualization part, disable storing received and passed trace data into the included FP TraceManager database, and disable the event processing part. With these three best practices, you get a very solid environment here, even able to cope with production load. So that's pretty much everything. Although we now see that's interesting, we now see a trace session suspended 9 times, so there is still the trace configuration setting on the Firebird server side, so the what is used on, or what can be used on disk is a bit too low, so you might increase that again until you see that there are no suspended trace session. But that's pretty much dependent on your production load and what you want to see. But keep those 3 best practices in mind. And well, that's pretty much everything I want to show, and hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.